Greetings, War Thunderers. This is Longshot with you again. This is a guide to flying the Ki-61-1c Hay in arcade and continues my fighter tutorial series. This plane's a modified version of the Ki-61-1c, using Mauser 151 cannons imported from Germany by submarine and fitted into the existing wing gun mountings in place of two 12.7mm machine guns. This added about 500 kilograms of weight to the plane, which was a light airframe with an underpowered engine, although some people have asserted that fuel tanks were removed, saving about 600 kilograms of weight at the cost of flying range. The Ki-61 was also fragile with poor armour, and this variant is no different. Like many Japanese planes, to survive you simply have to avoid getting hit. The main problem with this plane isn't its fragility or the power of its engine, it's this: the battle rating of 4.7 in arcade. And that puts it against some very powerful opponents. So in order to get a feel for how it's likely to perform, I'll just run it through some basic manoeuvres. With the extra weight in the wings, I'd expect its roll to be slower than the Otsu's, however it's exactly the same. That really doesn't make sense. It tells me that the flight model for this plane probably isn't finished yet. Rudder response is quite strong. So I'll just put the plane into a snap roll. And we can see that even though the reticle moves a long way off centre, it seems to be dominated by the rudder. So I'll start a Hineri Komi. And we can see that the rudder is far stronger than the elevator, pulling the plane to the side far more than it lifts up into a climb, and it's sluggish as I lift the nose up to level. Here's a pure elevator turn, which takes so long that you can make a cup of coffee while you wait. So this isn't a plane you should use in horizontal turn fights. And if you do, you'll want to use rudder as much as possible, not just elevator. Next I'll try a loop starting at 340 km an hour using WEP. Now this plane I'm flying here is fully researched, and it struggles to make it over the loop. Try this with a stock plane and you would stall it out unless your starting speed was significantly higher. And this really limits the Hay's use of energy tactics in a dogfight situation, especially when it's stock. Okay, it's about time I showed you some battles, and I'll start with one where the plane was in stock condition, with convergence set to 400 meters as you can see there. And the convergence is important given that the most powerful weapons are in the wings. And as this is a fragile plane with wing-mounted weapons, I'll be avoiding head-ons where possible. Okay, so having started out at around 2000 meters at 340 kilometers an hour, I've turned to the side and hit WEP to burst climb as quickly as possible. And this will show how well the plane can climb without any upgrades. The speed's dropped off markedly and falls down to 200 km an hour when the WEP fails, gaining us just over 700 meters in that initial climb. And that climb rate can only be described as poor. But I guess it's what you'd expect from a stock level plane, and that's why I'm climbing sideways to the battle. The next thing to look at is the plane's acceleration from slow speed, and it too is very poor. Later on I'll show you how it performs when fully researched, but I thought it's important to show you what to expect right after you've bought the plane. The Canon Corsair was brilliant in stock condition, but so far this plane is not. For this battle I'd lucked out a little on the matchmaking, with most planes battle rating in the high 3s or low to mid 4s. I'm not facing Bearcats here, but trust me, that'll come soon enough. And with such a dizzying array of fast and powerful opponents, I needed to first figure out how to survive, and secondly how to actually get kills in this plane. I already know this isn't a turn fighter because of its lack of elevator authority, so my first strategy is simply to try and climb and see if I can help secure high altitude supremacy. Climbing away from the battle like this has given me time to claw my way up, and also given my enemies time to dive away or perhaps be shot down by my teammates. By being patient at the outset, you can inherit control of high altitude by default, and that will set you up for the rest of the battle when it happens. However, this isn't going well so far. I've barely managed to reach 3,500 meters, and there's several enemy fighters higher up than me. If any look like they're targeting me, I'll have no option but to dive away into the clouds. And I'm particularly watching the Bf-109, who's the closest enemy, while looking around to keep track of where everyone else is. And when I see the Bf-109's range start to drop quickly, I decide to take no risks, and I'm going to nose over into a dive. So I guess in this game I'll be looking for targets in the furball below. Right, so now I'm approaching the central river where the dogfighting usually takes place on this map, flying through the clouds to avoid detection and still with a little speed carried over from my dive. Now, that buffalo doesn't seem aware of me, so I'll try to intercept him if I can. Okay, he's diving into the furball, so I'm checking to the right to make sure no one's about to blindside me before looking ahead to assess the situation. Buffalo's turning too hard to get a shot at him, and the yak's not lined up properly, so I'll extend away, and then climb and then look for another target. A P-38's just arrived and no one seems to have picked him up just yet, so I'll see if I can make a diving pass at him. Just trying to get onto his tail. Cannon shells are slow and drop quickly, so it's important to lead well in front of and above a target, and to shoot from fairly close range. The default belt on this plane is pretty bad, with only 1 in 4 shells being high explosive, so it's like firing machine guns. You need to get as long a burst on the target as you can. Anyway, I set that guy alight, but the fire went out quickly, so that's just an assist. I've bailed out of the kill train, and while I climb again, I'm looking around and waiting for my next opportunity. This is the ideal position to be in, above and behind a bunch of friendlies. Attackers will usually be attracted to them first, and I can swoop in on whichever's the easiest target. I just need to make sure there's enough friendlies around, as if they're all suddenly shot down, I could find myself in a lot of trouble. Forming below me is a bit of a kill train, and I want to pick up the enemy at the end of that train, not one at the front or halfway along. So I'm looking at that Spitfire, but by waiting a bit longer I'm not caught out by the sudden arrival of a Bf-109, the one I dived away from at the start of the battle in fact. So I switch onto him and line him up for my first kill in this plane. Can't get a shot at the Spitfire, so it's time to leave the furball and regain some altitude. Checking my 6 first to make sure I haven't picked up an attacker of my own. So that's not a bad start. You can get kills like this when everyone else is distracted, and you can use an altitude advantage to swoop in, get the kill and then extend away to safety. All it takes though is for one enemy to be aware of you, and suddenly it's not that easy. And that's why it's so important to be vigilant in scanning the skies whenever possible. Now that Spitfire's outrun his pursuers, so I'll try to peel him off the tail of the friendly that he's chasing. But here that default cannon belt fails me, scoring only hits in a situation where I'd be hoping to rip off a wing. And suddenly there's blue planes coming from everywhere and I need to bail out before I'm torn up by friendly fire. And now begins another long climb as I slowly return to the battle. And yes, you do really notice the plane's total lack of acceleration and climbing speed. I felt like an old age pensioner limping around on a walking stick while all these teenage kids raced everywhere to and fro. And even once the plane's upgraded, that feeling doesn't entirely go away. Okay, I'm finally back in position for another diving attack with a furball in process below. The LA-5 turns nicely into my path, allowing me to light him up as he climbs, except I aim high and I miss. My speed is still high, so I can use it to follow him through a diving turn. But a friendly A6M3 has turned tighter and I no longer have a shot. Now I'm low and slow, and you know what that means. I need to fly to safety and climb again. In a fast plane this would not be tedious, but in this plane it certainly is. And if that 109 had targeted me instead of a yak, I'd be dead right now. I'm caught out of position and I have no option but to fight. I have a good deflection shot on the Ki-45 here. But even though I'm aiming ahead of the lead indicator, the velocity of the cannon is just too slow and the shells miss the target. So having flown away, I now have a different angle of attack to everyone else, so I'll give it another crack. I set him alight, but that's not enough for the kill. So I intended to climb and reset, but at this point I went on a bit of a wild goose chase following a Focke-Wulf 190 that eventually just flew away from me. So here I am returning to the action, still with no altitude, and the battle is just about over by now. The furball's too close for me to ignore, so I'll try for a deflection shot. As usual, I'll try and pick up the tail end Charlie, in this case it's a Yak 9T. And there's the second kill. So with that the battle was over. 2 kills and 4 assists, plus I survived. Over a series of battles I found this plane to be quite effective at killing fighters, provided you can avoid too much enemy attention. Here I'm snap rolling to avoid a head-on with a Cannon Corsair, and then I go into a diving turn to gain some speed, which I'll need if he stays to dogfight me. Now that Corsair is a poor horizontal turner, yet that is exactly what his pilot's doing. I'm using rudder to cut inside his turn, while trying not to crash into the rocks below, and I've deployed combat flaps to increase lift to my wings, and as we both lose speed, my plane proves to be the better turner of the two. Now what that Corsair should have done was use its superior power in loops and Immelmans, and I'd have had no chance. Even though I got this kill, I'm now a sitting duck when new enemies arrive. Now I try to face this incoming Mustang and regain some altitude, but here my lack of engine power betrays me, and I stall myself out. As I said earlier, don't try and loop this plane, unless your speed's high. I'm now an easy target for a tiffy I didn't even see coming, and what I should have done was run for safety after killing the Corsair. By far the best way to kill planes in the hay is diving attacks or boom and zoom. Domination games are ideal, as most targets are low and slow in a furball, so you don't have to climb too high. There's barely any control lockup at high speed, so adjusting your aim is child's play. And after taking out the I-16, I don't have a secondary target, so I can extend towards friendly territory with the speed from my dive, checking my 6 before I start to climb. This attack involved greater risk with a longer and shallower diving approach that took me toward enemy territory rather than away from it. Originally I was trying to catch that Spitfire and ended up following him further than I normally would have. Now I've missed that kill, but right in front of me is a big fat P-47. Too tempting a target to pass up. That's a lovely deflection angle, and I still have enough speed to dive away and run for safety. Just in the nick of time. Here's another example of how versatile this plane is in a diving attack. Watch how many times I have to adjust my direction as I follow that Corsair down there in a curve. This really is the plane's strength. Superb handling at high speed, fast roll rate and strong rudder, letting you switch targets and adjust your aim easily. And then decent close-range cannons to finish off targets even with the default belt. The only drawback is the amount of time needed to get in position for each attack and how vulnerable you are when climbing due to your lack of speed. Although it does retain energy quite well coming out of a dive, even before you research many of its engine upgrades. Note that enemy LA-5 in the distance. He'll demonstrate one of the dangers you face in making these diving attacks. I presumed that he was far enough away not to be a threat to me, as I boom and zoomed those enemies over my airbase. And as you'll see, I was wrong. And when I started my dive, he began one of his own, and I was the target. As I extend and climb, I suddenly turn to find him right on my tail, and my attempts at evasion aren't enough to save me. As it's so easy to die in this plane, I'll run through a series of deaths, analysing how and why they occurred, and what if anything I could have done to avoid them. Yes, it's another domination battle, but this one's not going well for my team. My airbase is in fact being overrun. I nose down a little to gain some speed and then turn away. I'm too low to safely make a diving attack and expect to get away with it. There's a bunch of new friendlies on the way, so I still think an attack may be possible here. But I make the mistake of flying too far from that friendly support and assuming that those enemies will target other blue planes and not me. I begin a pass at this yak and then switch on to the Zero behind him. But he easily avoids me, so now I'm looking to escape. But all of a sudden I realise that there's no other friendlies around. They all went to the other base instead. I'm only flying at 470 kilometers an hour and slowing as I climb with a pack of fast and angry bandits behind me. This will not end well. I just don't have the power to get away. And in fact it'll be the Zero who runs me down, which says a lot about the speed of this plane. And by the way, although the Ki-61 had self-sealing tanks, I can tell you now that they very rarely work. This plane catches a light very easily, and it very rarely goes out. Now in this battle I'd already made a few successful boom and zoom attacks, but I've approached the enemy without enough of an altitude advantage, just as they killed one of the last blue planes down there, and suddenly I'm having to duck and weed to dodge head-ons. I know I'm almost certainly doomed, so as I'm diving I'll see if I can take another kill before I die. I settle for the Cannon Corsair, flying low and slow over the treetops. Now that's done, I hit WEP and try and jink my way back towards friendly skies, but 500 kilometers an hour or less is never going to be fast enough to escape the kill train that's behind me. If I'd had another 500 meters of altitude to begin with, the chances are that I'd have survived. In this instance, I start with a good altitude advantage at 2,000 meters for diving at a target down at the deck. I'm heading away from the battle at an isolated enemy with friendlies around, so what can possibly go wrong? Well, I didn't check the radar, which showed a red dot following me. And this shows the stealth cannon belt's effectiveness. It's very good indeed. And now I presume I'm safe, so I start to climb without checking first, and as a result, a twin Mustang lights me up. I could probably have killed him even now, except a Corsair is helicoptering up at me as well. And he fills me with holes at long range. And now with no aileron, I cannot roll at all. My rudder's gone, I can't maneuver. Now there are many planes in arcade that handle just fine with black control surfaces. The Ki-61 is not one of them. If a surface is red it becomes very sluggish, and if it's black it stops working altogether. So this plane is no longer flyable, I have no choice but to bail out. Now you may have noticed a common thread here. I'm getting hit as I extend away from attacks, and occasionally people go out of their way to target me, as this plane's known to be an easy kill. Now this P-39 lines me up from a long way out, and this is a rare occasion when the snap roll head-on evasion fails. I've seriously had people fly through clouds of friendlies to get to me as I cower behind my own airbase, and once I was trolled by a B-17 at low altitude that followed me with his gunners, and I lacked the speed to get away. But not all kills are avoidable. I've had the worst imaginable run of luck in this plane. It just seems to be a bullet magnet. I'm lining up a diving attack on that yak down there when suddenly, yep. So enough with the doom and gloom. How does the plane perform when all the upgrades are researched? Well, let's take a look. As usual, I'm burst climbing after spawn, flying sideways to the battle at an angle of around 27 degrees. The climb rate is certainly better, enough to make an extra 200 meters per burst climb. And that's enough to make it acceptable, but far from great. There's still plenty of fighters at this battle rating, and indeed, even right down to Tier 1, that will outclimb this plane. Its acceleration from low speed still has not improved. It's still extremely poor. So if you're caught in a low energy state, you're in a lot of trouble. It also contributes to the poor climbing ability of the plane, as it takes so long to recover after a burst climb. It's probably one of the few fighters in arcade that might be better going for a gentle sustained climb instead, and that's what I'll try in this next burst climb, with a shallower angle of ascent. As usual, there's plenty of other fighters who've beaten me up to high altitude, and I'm hanging back being patient, as I can't afford to lead the merge with enemy fighters. And there they are. My second burst climb at stock level only reached 3,400 meters, and now it's fully upgraded. It makes it to 3,800 when the WEP gives out, though it could possibly have made it to 4,000 with a steeper climb angle, at the expense of speed. There's only 3 enemies who've climbed, and a high likelihood of at least one of them being shot down, so the chances of securing high altitude supremacy in this battle are looking good. And now that I have a bit of height under my wings, I can start to push forward as well. As it turned out, the enemies all dived or were killed, so I ended up high over their base where I saw several fighters trying to climb. And now it's time to see how well this plane can boom and zoom at high altitude. I'm going to start an attack run from 5,500 meters. And its high speed handling is perfect as usual. I'm at around 4,000 meters when I hit the target. And on the zoom climb, I easily return to my starting altitude. And contrary to what I expected, once you reach high altitude in this plane, its performance seems to improve. It's just so difficult to climb up here to begin with. There's an LA-5 down there climbing, so I'm going to position myself above him for the next attack, which I'll start from a height of around 5,000 meters. So far my angle of attack isn't the best on this plane. I'd rather get behind him and match my wing angle to his if possible. But that's not bad at all. The good rudder response enabled me to follow him. And that took me right down to 3,000 meters, so let's see how well it zoom climbs. I had to push it pretty hard, but I'm back up to my starting altitude again. And once the plane's fully upgraded, you can start thinking about other types of energy maneuvers. In this case, I'm looking to suppress a climbing Griffin-powered Spitfire, who's rapidly approaching me and looking to go head-on. His plane is a lot more powerful than mine. I can't try to outclimb him or to run away. He'll catch me if I do, and my chances in a head-on would be slim, so I go into a fake head-on which gains me speed, and then pull up just outside guns range. He stands his plane on end in an effort to follow me, and now I want to enter a climbing spiral, using my superior energy to exhaust his remaining speed. And as he helicopters at me, I very nearly lose my tail, but this time luck's on my side, and I'm relatively unharmed. He stalled his plane, and with my combat flaps on, I only have just enough elevator response to get guns on him. If instead of following my climb he dived into a low yo-yo and then attacked with fresh energy, I doubt I would have survived for very long. And this is one of the more risky things you can do in this plane, seeing how fragile and flammable it is. I'm approaching this B-25 from the side and below to avoid his gunners, and then I light him up from close range. And I break off as soon as I see Tracer, and fortunately I'd set him on fire with my last few shells, and that was enough to get the kill. but even that brief exposure to his gunners has inflicted damage. In this case I'm lucky it's not critical. In this example there's a line of 3 bombers, the last of which is a B-25, and I have to take him out first. And what I should have done is dive into a low yo-yo and attacked him from beneath and the side as I did last time, but instead I risk an attack from above. This is how not to do it. This cost me a black wing and fuselage damage, but there's worse yet to come. My attack has carried me very close to the other 2 bombers, and suddenly I find myself firing at the PBY, and that's my undoing. Don't let your plane take you somewhere where you haven't planned to go beforehand. Anyway, the fire's gone out, but I have a black elevator and rudder, which means the plane's unflyable, and I have to bail. In conclusion, what are these planes' strengths? Well, firepower, once you have the stealth or air target's cannon belt unlocked, high-speed maneuverability, energy retention in a zoom climb, and high-altitude performance. Its weaknesses are its terrible acceleration and poor climb rate, its fragility, and the realistic nature of its damage model in a world where many other planes handle just fine with black control surfaces. The real drawback with this plane, though, is the fact that it's wildly overtiered. For example, let me compare it to the P-40E Kitty Hawk. That P-40 has a better climb rate, it turns faster, accelerates quicker, its 650 cals are just as deadly, it handles almost as well in a dive, and it has a tougher damage model. All round, the P-40 is a better plane, and yet its battle rating is just 2.7. I know the Hayes BR is about to drop to 4.3, but it's still way too high for what this plane is capable of doing. Anyway, here's my record in the Hay. 40 flyouts, 21 deaths and 61 kills, and that seems like a decent kill to death ratio until you realise that I'm only averaging 1.5 kills a mission. In fact, the most kills I ever managed in a single battle was 4. If you didn't care about surviving, you'd do just as well by derping into the nearest furball, as at least you'd be out of the plane quickly and flying something more enjoyable like a Zero or B-782. And also, by the time I'd finished researching the upgrades, the Hay had earned enough research points to unlock the first Ki-84, which looks like a better plane all round. I didn't mention the bombs this plane can carry, but frankly I don't see the point of them. If I want to kill ground targets, I'll fly a B-782. So for now, this 61 is parked in my hangar where it'll stay until its battle rating or flight model improves. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Look forward to meeting you in the skies.